The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden glow over the busy streets. Grace stood on the corner, her legs trembling from exhaustion. For hours, she had been singing, holding a cardboard sign that read, "Help my son." Her voice was hoarse, her throat dry, but she kept singing because it was all she had left. Ethan, her 3-year-old son, clung to her tightly, his small arms wrapped around her neck. He was too weak to play or laugh like he used to, and Grace's heart broke a little more every time she looked into his tired eyes. Passers-by glanced at her, some with pity, others with indifference. A few tossed coins into the small donation box at her feet, but most just walked by, their conversations drowning out her voice. Grace didn't blame them. Everyone had their own struggles, their own lives to live, but she was desperate. Ethan needed surgery to save his life, and the hospital bills were far beyond anything she could ever afford. She had tried everything, charities, fundraisers, even reaching out to old friends, but nothing had worked. Singing on the street was her last resort. She had always loved music, and her voice had once been her pride. Now it was her only hope. As the crowd thinned and the sky darkened, Grace felt her resolve faltering. Her voice cracked, and tears welled up in her eyes. "Please," she whispered, her words barely audible. "Someone, anyone, help us." Just as she was about to pack up and go home, defeated, a car pulled up to the curb. The engine purred softly as the door opened, and a man stepped out. He was dressed in a sharp blue suit, his sunglasses reflecting the last rays of the sun. Grace barely noticed him at first, too focused on Ethan, who was stirring in her arms. But then the murmurs around her grew louder. "Is that Johnny Depp?" someone whispered. Grace's head shot up, her tired eyes meeting the man's. It was him. She had seen his movies, of course, but she never imagined she would see him in real life, let alone in a moment like this. Johnny Depp walked toward her with an air of quiet confidence, his gaze fixed on her and Ethan. He crouched down slightly to meet Ethan's eyes, a soft smile playing on his lips. "Hey there, buddy," he said gently. "What's your name?" Ethan blinked up at him, his voice barely a whisper. Ethan." Johnny's smile widened. "Ethan, huh? That's a strong name. You're a brave little guy, aren't you?" He glanced up at Grace, his expression turning serious. "What's going on here?" Grace hesitated, unsure of how to explain, but something in his eyes, kindness, compassion, made her feel like she could trust him. She took a deep breath and told him everything. She spoke about Ethan's condition, the mounting medical bill, and her failed attempts to get help. Her voice cracked as she spoke, but she kept going, pouring out her heart to this stranger who had stopped to listen. When she finished, Johnny nodded thoughtfully. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick wad of cash, handing it to her without hesitation. "This should help," he said simply. Grace stared at the money, her hands trembling. I can't accept this," she stammered. "You've already done so much just by stopping to listen." Johnny shook his head, his smile gentle but firm. "This isn't charity. It's doing what's right." He looked her in the eye. "And I'm not stopping." Before Grace could respond, he pulled out his phone and made a quick call. She watched, bewildered, as he spoke to someone on the other end, explaining her situation in detail. Within minutes, a black SUV pulled up to the curb. 2 men stepped out, introducing themselves as part of Johnny's team. "Don't worry," one of them said. "We'll take care of everything, from covering Ethan's medical expenses to setting up a trust fund for his future." Grace was overwhelmed. Tears streamed down her face as she tried to thank Johnny, but the words caught in her throat. "I don't even know what to say," she managed. "You've saved my son's life." Johnny placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Just take care of him. That's all the thanks I need." As the SUV drove them to the hospital, Grace held Ethan tightly, her heart filled with gratitude and disbelief. For the first time in months, she felt a glimmer of hope. At the hospital, Ethan was admitted for immediate surgery. Johnny stayed by Grace's side throughout the procedure, his presence a source of comfort and strength. He brought Ethan a small toy pirate ship, saying, "Every great adventurer needs a ship." Ethan's eyes lit up, and for the first time in weeks, he smiled. The surgery was long and nerve-wracking. Grace paced the waiting room, her hands clasped tightly together. Johnny sat nearby, his calm demeanor helping to steady her nerves. When the doctor finally emerged, his expression was one of relief. "It was a success," he announced. "Ethan is going to be just fine." Grace collapsed into a chair, her hands covering her face as sobs racked her body. "Thank you," she whispered over and over again. her voice choked with emotion. In the days that followed, Grace's life began to change. With Johnny's help, she found a stable job and a safe place to live. Ethan, now healthy and full of energy, became a vibrant little boy who loved to play and laugh. He spent hours reenacting pirate adventures with the toy ship Johnny had given him, his laughter filling their home. One evening, as Grace tucked Ethan into bed, he looked up at her with sleepy eyes. "Mommy, is Mr. Johnny an angel?" Grace smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Maybe he is, sweetheart. Maybe he is." As she turned off the light and closed the door, she glanced at the photo on the mantel, a snapshot taken the day of Ethan's surgery. It showed Grace, Ethan, and Johnny all smiling together. Beneath the photo, she had written a simple caption: "Kindness can change the world." Months later, Grace decided to give back to her community. Inspired by Johnny's generosity, she started a charity to help families in need, focusing on single parents struggling to provide for their children. She often thought about the day Johnny had stopped his car, the day her life had changed forever. As for Johnny, he continued to check in on Grace and Ethan from time to time. Whenever he was in town, he would visit, bringing small gifts for Ethan and sharing stories of his adventures. For Grace, he wasn't just a celebrity. He was a guardian angel who had stepped into their lives when they needed him most. And though the world saw Johnny Depp as a Hollywood icon, Grace and Ethan saw him as something much more, a true hero who had changed their lives forever.